Good morning, America. Thank you for watching Taxes Made Easy. We've been spending the last really week or two, probably last couple of weeks, going over asset issues, how those figure into the larger picture here. But also, we've been wrapping up talking about income and expenses, putting that all together. And today we're going to take a step back and say, okay, how does this all mesh together? What does this all mean when you put it together? And basically, it tells you when you do it right, it tells you what you qualify for and what your rights and options are with the IRS. So that's the whole point of going through all the numbers that we just went through. We're going to take a step back and say, okay, well, how does this matter? And how do you present this and look at this to determine what your options are with the IRS and with states? So stay tuned. We've got a lot of information to cover. Welcome back, everybody. Got a lot of news to cover. I'm going to try to get through it fairly quick so we can get to our topic of the day. The first article is an interesting one. This has been going around for a little bit. I haven't touched on it yet. Again, it's hard to tell, but this is been coming from multiple news sources. About the turmoil going on in New York City Mayor Eric Adams' administration. So he's under investigation. And again, I have some respect for him. He's a former police chief. He believes in law enforcement, or that's what he campaigned on. And but he's has multiple investigations going on. The feds are investigating him. So, an influence peddling scandal, so affecting the school's chancellor and the police commissioner. So, two of his top federal aides. So, here's the crazy part: federal agents, and this is the Biden administration doing this. So, this is a partisan attack. Raided the home of the two deputy mayors last week, confiscating devices, phones, computers, etc. And he's been adamant about staying and governing the city. But how can you do that when your New York, the NYPD Commissioner could be forced to resign in just a few days? So this is by NBC going into depth about this. So this is the original source is an NBC article. Again, I'm just doing a summary here. If you're in New York and you're in the area, again, New York is one of the largest or the largest cities in the entire country, and affects a lot of people. So there should be more information right now. The news cycle is getting swallowed up by the debate that's happening tomorrow. But I would pay attention to see what's going on here in New York City. So again, a lot of allegations flying. And I'm also going to post the original, well, you could just access the original article through the link. Moving on, I want to focus on two articles that really do hammer in on big tech. So Apple, and this is mainly the European Union, also the United States as well, but the European Union, the EU's top courts, have really been, and prosecutors have been going after big tech. In some ways, it's kind of scary, but like in France, where they're going after people for refusing to censor. So they're really cracking down on free speech in some ways. But in this case, they're going after Apple for not paying enough in taxes. Apple's position is that they pay taxes just in the United States, whereas the EU is insisting they too many tax benefits in Ireland, so they're smacking them with a 13 billion euro penalty, which is around 14.4 billion in US dollars. This goes all the way back to actions from 2016, so 8 years ago. but it's taken that long to go through the courts, and it's been appealed, etc. So again, Apple, it seems like they're shrugging it off, but again, it's they appealed, they fought it all the way through, and now it's at the highest court. Just last March, they got hit with the fine of 1.8 billion euros for abusing its dominant position for music streaming apps. So if you have Apple devices, you have to have most of it. What you need to use is Apple apps and Apple Music, Apple everything, and that's by design. Is it monopolistic and anti-competitive? Yeah, probably. But it's not just Apple. So moving to the next article, and here we go. This time it is Google, who's bigger and worse than Apple when it comes to monopolistic tendencies here. So now it's the United States. This is a CNN article. And this has been going on for a while. Again, big tech is becoming so dominant. And the problem is big tech is out there censoring speech. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg just admitted that again, that they're manipulating the information and data in favor of Kamala Harris in this election cycle. So we know they do it. It's just kind of scary that you have big companies censoring speech and favoring speech. So they claim to be neutral, but they're anything but. So Google, so again, the accusation is it hasn't just illegally courted the market in search, it's squeezed online publishers with a trifecta of monopolies. So not just one monopoly, but a trifecta. I actually applaud the DOJ and the Biden administration for going after Google. This is not a short-term thing. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. They went after AT&T when they were dominated the phone business. More and more monopolies have thrived and strangled parts of businesses, and every now and then the government actually moves in and tries to address monopoly. I don't think there's any denying that Google has multiple monopolies and strangleholds on internet advertising, internet searches, etc. It was filed just last year, but I hope that I don't care that whoever gets elected continues this fight to make it the internet, to keep it free, to keep it competitive, and it really is. Try to understand and predict Google's algorithm is like guessing in the dark. Where are they going to go next month? So, and 2/3 of most advertising revenue is going to Google. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's just interesting that you had Apple and Google both in the crosshairs. And I do applaud the Biden administration for going after them and trying to get this taken care of. Now, this is a scarier article. If you haven't heard about this, there's one town in Ohio that really highlights what's going on with illegal immigration. And I like this article because it talks about both sides of it. So again, it really focuses on the small town in Ohio, but this is happening across the country. It's just a little more extreme in this town because it's got a small population of about 58,000, and 15 to 20,000 Haitians have been immigrated, a lot of it by the government directly to this town. So since 2020, you've had this huge increase in Haitians. Most of them are men looking for work. Now, ironically, what do the businesses need? Men looking for work. So this town has a shrinking population, but because of this, you have a lot of blue collar jobs abound. So they need workers. Now, instead of hiring American workers, you don't think American workers would move to a small town if they paid people to do so? I think they would. But knowing the businesses have been working hand in hand with the Biden administration, and I'm gonna kind of rip the Chamber of Commerce, because if you don't think big business has wanted cheap labor from all this illegal immigration, you're fooling yourself. This is the corporate world hand in hand, and even normal manufacturers. They're looking for some way to save money. Do I really blame them? Yes, because they're looking out for number one for their company and not to go to the community. That's my problem. So again, people are coming from Haiti, the poorest country in the world, trying to find jobs, trying to better their economic situation. And I feel for these immigrants. And the government, our government, has enabled them through CPP-1, Coast and Border Protection mobile app. So a way for them to streamline their entry into the country. Why? Because, and they also have the immigration parole program, temporary protected status. This is all designed by the Homeland Secretary Mayorkas. This is all part of the plan. But again, the businesses knew about it. They planned for it. But the people running the city had no clue. So the city is tackling this, trying to find an immigrant accountability task force. And they didn't get a chance to have an infrastructure in place. Now they're trying to build and accommodate for 20,000 more people, which is nuts. And this is, I don't know if it's technically a sanctuary city, but it's a more liberal city, and they're trying to welcome people. But there's a difference of, oh, let's make a plan, let's build out, let's prepare for this, and here's 15 to 20,000 people out of a population of less than 60,000. Deal with it. That's causing a lot of problems. A lot of residents are upset. And yes, there's cultural differences. So part of it, and this is, I don't know if it's funny. So that they're eating local cats, they're eating the ducks, wild ducks in the area, because, hey, that's what they do in Haiti. They're not, not everything has to come wrapped in plastic at the store. And some of the concerns are, again, they don't respect property rights in the United States because things are very, very different there. And so again, and I do think it's the way the government does this. There's ways to bring in workers legally. If we actually control the border, there's a way to do this, but they've opened this up until a giant flood where it's very poorly controlled. But they interviewed the New York Times actually interviewed one of the workers. He's making $19 an hour, has a 401k, has health insurance. And for someone coming from Haiti, that's amazing. For a blue-collar union worker, $19 an hour is not that good. But he's being able to buy a home in Miami, which he rents out. I mean, he's taking these people's fortunes and completely flipping on its head in a good way. And they're sharing a home there in Springfield with 3 other men paying $2,400 to rent. You split it 3 ways, that's $800 a month. Very doable. And so you have government agencies set up to help them out. But I am out of time, so we're going to have to come back to this. Welcome back, everybody. I was just wrapping up that last article. Really, it is the business community and the Biden administration not communicating nor coordinating with local leaders, even though they're liberal. It's a liberal city. They want to welcome immigrants, and it's creating a disaster. But I want to move on. This is an interesting article from the Populist Times. I don't know why Trump has such a knee-jerk reaction with tariffs. They can be a useful tool at times, but he's taking so much heat with throwing around tariffs for this, tariffs for that, and he's going to threaten a 100% tariff on countries that ditch the dollar. This to me sounds a little overbearing. Can be very counterproductive, and very big brotherish to me. So I'm not a fan of this. I do support his use to tariffs and limited means. It's something that's worked. But when you slap tariffs on countries of 100%, what that does is just drive them elsewhere, straight in the arms of countries like China and India and Russia, which are not our friends. So at a glance, what he's proposing, and this is to prevent the U.S. dollar from tumbling, and it is the world currency right now, reserve currency. If we lose that, that's going to do immense damage to our economy. So I understand why he wants to do that. I think there's better ways of doing it. But the problem is our politicians have spent money like crazy. We've devalued the dollar, which is the reason for inflation, and made the dollar less attractive to the world. And because we can't get our financial house in order, we expect others to stay with the US dollar. I'm not on board with that. So again, I think limited use of tariffs. I think slapping high tariffs on China for their rampant abuse, absolutely. But threatening every single country out there with a huge tariff if they don't play by our rules, yeah, I don't think that's going to be great, and it could lead to massive inflation here at home. It could really backfire on them. So again, they're discussing penalizing countries that trade in currencies other than the dollar. There's other options including export controls, currency manipulation charges. Is claimed that the dollar has been under major siege for 8 years. Absolutely, led by China. The BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China. They're not our friends. Brazil is very leftist right now, and they're not acting like our friend either. So it's very funny when you get a lot of leftist governments. They tend to go socialist and very anti-U.S. Anyway, he just announced this at a rally in Wisconsin. I'm not, and I'm glad that someone's tackling this. And he's talking about BRICS, but again, there's better ways to do this, and I don't think tariffs can work in the short term. The long term, they just cause massive economic problems that can sit there and simmer for years and years and years and hurt American consumers. So I'm glad that he's looking forward to doing something. Is this the right way? I really doubt it. And here is from the Financial Times. Now, this is coming from a very leftist perspective. But again, I'll try to be balanced and fair. I question the use of tariffs, and so does this author. So she's Eric Zolt, professor of tax law and policy at UCLA. And he served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax Analysis at the U.S. Treasury. So he's partially at fault for our horrible monetary policy. But I do think it's right, and we should be able to raise questions. Does this make sense? I'm reading through his article, and I'm not going to get too deep into it because it really gets into the weeds. But he's saying that the lost jobs due to China shock isn't due to China joining the WTO. I mean, China's been doing this for a long time. He's saying it's the sources are complex. It's complicated, is what he said. But just because it's complicated doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything about it. And that's one of the things is that our politicians right and left, have been giving China most favored nation status while they've been cheating the heck out of us. To put it nicely. And instead of calling them out and holding them responsible, we've been selling our own manufacturing short just because multinational companies, mainly U.S., have been able to make a killing overseas. He does make what I think is a decent point here, that our own tax policy can, he claims it's an America Last policy, that you get favorable taxes by sending goods overseas, by doing business overseas, and then importing those goods to the United States. Yeah, that is kind of backwards, upside down. But what he argues for, I don't agree with this, is joining the international tax agreement. So Janet Yellen, who again I think has said some of the dumbest things I've ever heard. She's claimed, one, that inflation was transitory. She tried to claim that we need a global tax. We need to go after billionaires across the world, mainly in the U.S. though, and do wealth taxes, et cetera, like that. And this is really what this guy is advocating for. So the questions he raises, the problems he raised, make some sense. And he's saying, both Democrats and Republicans are pushing nationalist economic policy. Let's protect the United States. Let's have good trade policy here. So it's both sides doing this. This 100% tax really is overdoing it. Would that actually happen? Who knows? But by pushing this, by joining international tax agreements where foreign powers control our tax policy, I absolutely disagree with that. That's a huge violation of the Constitution, and it's a way to pass a lot of liberal ideas that are being pushed out there currently that would have a huge devastating impact on the United States. And there are plenty of people in the United States, liberals. New York Times has written articles about this, pushing global taxes, attacking, especially going after billionaires to make sure they pay their fair share. They already pay more than anybody else, and nobody talks about that. But that's not the way to help an economy. That's a way to hurt an economy. Very likely much worse than what he's concerned about. So, and then he talks about the damaging side effects of tariffs, which there can be many. Long term, they can absolutely just increase the burdens on the American people. But again, it gets a little bit into the weeds here, and I want to move on. So interestingly enough, Mark Cuban has been in the news as a big Kamala Harris supporter. And sometimes you just look at people and you just want to slap them. I'm sorry. I'm not a fan of Mark Cuban.
CEO of cash backing cash back in every
people ask, well, why is Mark Cuban a billionaire supporting Harris? Because she doesn't think he'll actually do it. He's insisting that Harris won't actually tax unrealized gains, even though she said she wants to. He says it's more of a political statement to get, it's for the people, for the masses. Hey, let's go after the, again, he thinks she's just blowing hot air at him. However, I'm not so sure.
If you tax unrealized gains,
the question is what
going to kill the
Congress
stock market,
is very
right? And it's going to be the ultimate employment plan for private equity.
You get a Democrat majority,
because companies are not going to go public because you can get whipsawed, right? I mean, they realize that.
She's actually
I can't repeat it
on
enough.
this.
Even though she's not directly conflicting the Biden tax plan, to her value proposition is
he claims it would kill the stock
everybody
market
fairly.
But as you've said yourself, you can't speak for the vice president. These are things they're telling you. Who knows what they're telling other people? My guess is they're telling anybody who's donating to them exactly what they want to hear at this point. What matters is what they say publicly.
And they actually pushed them on this, and good for them.
Absolutely, positively not.
And
let me just be very
I don't know,
clear.
why do you think that they're telling you the truth and not telling other people other things?
Well, I don't,
if they won't say it publicly, say it publicly. Tell all of us so that
we
know.
I get it, but you've got to get the details right.
Yeah, but we have 60 days to an election.
Unrealized gains, you're going to kill the stock market. And it's going to be the ultimate employment plan for private equity because companies are not going to go public. So if you have publicly traded companies, that's where you have the values based on the stock market. Well, why would you do that? If you have a publicly closely held company, you're not going to be subject to that because it's much harder to value privately held stock. And so if you don't go public, you can avoid this. But that makes it that much harder to raise capital. It makes it that much harder for average Americans to invest and earn money through the stock market. So, and he talks about in the early stages of companies, it's coming to be cash poor. So he goes on about why this doesn't make sense and how he's told them it's not going to work, but are they listening? And again, the Democratic nominee hasn't publicly crossed concerns about this. And they might be telling people like Cuban what they want to hear, regardless of the position they plan to take. The people pushing this, the people in the Harris administration, are the same people in the Biden administration that put these plans together. So if you want to, I think it's absolute your peril to push and support someone and then, listen to what their positions are. That's probably what they're going to do or what they've supported over the years. And so they even ask him, my guess is that they're telling anybody who's donating to them exactly what they want to hear at this point. And he says, no, absolutely, positively not. No way, Cuban interjected. And so it's just, yeah, I think it's kind of funny. But I do think it's interesting that it's coming from the right and the left, from people embedded in the economy and very familiar with the economy, that the idea to tax unrealized gains is a horrible idea. So I want to real quick just going to touch on this. I have to admit, I don't like to watch the debates. I really don't. I don't like the slugfest. A lot of it is, both sides. It's hyperbole. This person's going to end the world. This other person's going to blow up half the world with nuclear weapons, whatever. I do follow and I read up on the highlights, etc. And maybe I will tonight watch the presidential debate. But I think it's important to look at what comes out of it, what kind of policies, and so. And this is fairly even, suggesting that Harris define herself, really lay down her policies. Most people still don't have a clearly defined understanding what she's campaigning for. 63% they want to learn more about Harris's policies. So they advise to hers to be substantive and have details about her policies and how that's going to help her hurt her campaign. Or hurt or help the American people. That's one of the biggest criticisms of her, that she didn't have specifics and just over the weekend put up a list of policies on her campaign website. So the weekend before the debate. And she has to come off as presidential. Someone that can be taken serious and go toe-to-toe with world leaders. For Trump, everybody knows Trump. We've seen him time and time again. We know who he is. And his job is to define Harris by her record and by what she said, and also address the flip-flopping. I'm for fracking, I'm against it. I'm, for open borders. We're for securing the border, which they have not done. We haven't tried to do, and really hammer on what's happened in the last 3 years with the Biden administration. And the other thing for him is to look presidential. Don't be too aggressive. So that's one of the things about the danger points here. So I think it's interesting if you can watch the debate or read up about it, get informed. We see some people on both sides of the aisle. I support Trump. Why? Can they answer it? Or I support Harris. The new thing is hope. No, not hope. It's joy. What does that mean? What are you actually supporting? Why? Will it actually help the country? Will it help people that are the poorest and struggling the most. So get informed so you can make a wise decision. I don't care who you vote for, but we should get out there and vote, and we should be informed when making those decisions as well. So switching gears, going to the topic of the day, and I'm going to jump back to what I pulled up yesterday. So this is going back to the analysis, and this is what I was sharing is our own CRM that we use, and pretty much all the CRMs are the same or very similar, and that's a case management system. But when you go to this, there are really two major parts of this. The first one, and this is what we talked about first, is assets. So when you're looking at assets, it really is a summary of everything that's being added up. Now there's some errors on this, or things that can be a little confusing, but you have to total up your bank accounts, cash on hand, investments, valuated at 80%, and if you have any loan against them, so if you have a 401k loan, that gives you, so I'm just going to plug some numbers in. So let's say I have $10,000 in here. And let's actually increase that number. Let's make it $100,000. But let's say I have a $20,000 loan. Still shows $60,000 in equity. But if I can't access this anymore, usually you only allow 1 or 2 loans. If you can't access the equity in this, you can ignore this $60,000 as an asset. Life insurance. Now this is cash value. They're not looking for a death benefit because you don't have to die to pay your taxes. If you do die, they'll take whatever money is there, but I think life insurance goes directly. Life insurance goes directly to the beneficiary, so you don't have to worry about that. It's whatever's left over in your estate. But if you die, and let's say you have $20,000 and a whole life policy, they want 80% of it. It's just like any other investment. Cash it out, give them the money. Now, if you have a loan out against it, so let's say you have a $16,000 loan out against it, it wipes out the value. But if you do, let's say you only have a $2,000 loan out against it, they're going to want that $14,000. And life insurance is easy to cancel. The life insurance companies don't want you to cancel it, but they will absolutely tell you to cancel it. Give them the money. Retirement accounts. So you have $200,000 in a retirement account. You could have a loan out against it. It's not very typical. So this can be as people are older, this is often one of the biggest numbers out here. 160,000. Let's make it 400,000. So someone has a decent sized retirement account to help them in retirement. And let's say they're retired. We can ignore this as an asset if they draw off of it monthly. So this is all things that I've talked about, but you can see how this number grows and grows and grows. The question is, can you eliminate some of these assets? So again, for 401k, if you have a loan out against it, if you have life insurance and you have a loan out against it, you can eliminate that as an asset. But you have to be careful that if you take money out of these, you have to use it for allowable purposes. Don't run to Vegas, or that's just going to create another problem. So we're hitting a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and just covering some of this information here. If you are, the best way to do this, look at what the average amount is in your bank account. If the average amount is $3,000, what they don't have on here is that there's $1,000 reduction here. So I would list out your assets, don't leave anything out, and then go one by one and say, okay, what's the average amount in our bank account? Do we have any cash on hand, investments, life insurance? Go through and add these up. So on your vehicles, let's say you have a vehicle worth $10,000. You take an 80% valuation. Let's say you have one person in a home. That's how you get to that number. They have this here for multiple vehicles. You can only do it for the first two. If you have primary and secondary, so let's say you have a second vehicle worth $6,000, hardly any equity, so it doesn't add that much. So if you get rid of these, let's say you're retired, you're living on your investments, life insurance, you do have some equity on this. You can get rid of most of this, except for the life insurance. And you're looking at an offer of around around $20,000. And depending on how much you owe, if you owe $100,000 or more, that's still a great offer and compromise. And so you have personal effects, other assets together. But this is how you would look at and analyze what is your asset value. Now, there's two major parts. Number one thing, asset. How much do you have in assets? How much wealth have you accumulated? Now, one of the things I didn't mention here, real estate. This is one of the biggest assets out here. So let's add real estate in there. So we're talking about your primary home. They take 80% valuation on it, and let's say you owe $100,000. So let's say someone's retired. They're living on the investments, so we can eliminate that as an asset. The life insurance, we have to leave that alone. Retirement account, we can eliminate that as an asset because they're living off of it. So 400,000 times 80% is 320,000, and you owe 100,000 if you're older. The IRS is going to add $220,000 in equity to your home or to your offer. So this, and the crazy part here is depending on what you're doing, it changes how much they will allow for. So if you're doing a non-collectible status or hardship status or an installment agreement, you can go in and say, look, I can't access this. Yeah, I have all this equity in my home, but nobody's going to give me a loan. I'm living on Social Security. I'm living off of retirement. I can't access equity. So you can just go online, LendingTree, Rocket Mortgage, whatever, fly-by-night mortgage company. And just all you have to do is show that here's a rejection of your application, and they will leave the equity in your home alone. They used to do that for offers, but the Biden administration changed that. Whereas if you have equity in your home, it will always be added. For this case, if you owed, let's say they owed $350,000 on their home still, there's zero equity because you take 80% valuation of the home and then subtract out the loan. So you have to be very careful of this. This is what hurts people more than anything else right now, going for offer and compromises. If they have any equity, it will be added to the offer. Now, that's a recent change. Depending on what happens with the election, that might change. It might go back to the way it was under the Trump administration, Obama administration, and Bush before him. That rule has been in place for a very long time. But again, the IRS has been given a lot of teeth to go after average taxpayers, because this is not something average taxpayers are making a killing on. This is going after people that can't afford to refinance their home and treating them as if they can access the equity in their home when they really can't. So again, that's if you haven't noticed, that's one of my sore spots that frustrates me because it hurts people. It hurts people in many ways. They have to do a hardship status or an installment agreement instead of an offer and compromise, even if they would qualify otherwise. So there's a lot of pitfalls here as you go through. So you have to watch for this. The other half of this, you have your income. So in this one, let's say we have two people, they're retired. Let's say they're getting $4,000 in Social Security, $2,000 in Social Security. I'm going to get rid of this number. So this example, they're bringing about $6,000 a month, mostly from Social Security, and total expenses $8,375. they're perfect offer and compromise candidates. So again, you've got to go through these numbers, and this is where things change. So some of these numbers are outdated. A lot of them went down, which again boggles the mind why the government can claim that things cost less now, even though inflation has been raging for the last few years. And with the IRS, you have to use the standards. When you're dealing with states, they follow mostly the same rules, except for on assets, states will still let you do an offer and compromise if you can show you can't access the property. Now, unfortunately, the states are hearing about and learning some of the things that the IRS is doing. And so they are tightening up their analysis, but so far they're still allowing people to do offer and compromises if you qualify. Now, the best state for that, believe it or not, is New York. One of the worst states for an offer is California, but other states do have offer and compromises programs, and we have had success with some of the states. Some of the states, they just, even though they qualify, they just, we don't want to do that right now. Arizona being one of the worst in that respect. But we have gotten offers accepted elsewhere. So again, it is an option out there in many states. Not all states have an offer and compromise program. But the nice thing about the states is that they will go off of your actual expenses in most cases. You can use the IRS numbers as a guideline, and those using the IRS numbers and say, okay. But they still want to look at your bank statements and see the expenses coming out, but they will give you your actual expenses. And the crazy part about that is we have plenty of cases where someone doesn't qualify for an IRS offer and compromise, but we've been able to do it with New York State instead. And the rule of thumb, and this is how it's always been, that the states are harder to work with than the IRS. Their tax states, that sticks around much longer. So we typically advise people to pay off the state and deal with the IRS. That's now being flipped on its head in some cases, and we're switching our recommendations because there's ways that the IRS has become harder to deal with than the states, and that's mainly been under the current administration, and it really does chap my hide. So we've gone through this in detail. You go through, and if you need some more expenses, so let's say if they were a little bit under this, if their income was $8,000 or $8,500, you can go get some more term life insurance policy. You can get some disability. You can purchase a newer car within reason if you needed to. So right here, they can get credit for another $619. But you have to be reasonable, so you do this, but you can move these numbers around. And just looking at the summary over here. So in this case, because the equity in the home, it makes absolutely no sense to do an offer and compromise. But if we go back and look at the assets, we change this to $358,000 again, $350,000. That goes away. You're looking at the bank accounts, life insurance, and vehicle, a $22,000 offer, which is still, I would fight to get that lower. I would cash out the life insurance and do something with it, pay down debt. So let's say you get rid of that. And that's just based on the equity in the vehicles and your bank accounts. That's a $9,000 offer on a $50,000 liability. Not a bad way to go. But you really have to be looking at the summary here. And this just talks about an offer and compromise. So it gives you an idea of the total equity. And you have to know if they're going to go after it or not. If it's not cash, I usually will leave it alone. Unless you have assets well in excess of your liability. So if you have the investments to pay off your liability in full and you're not relying on your retirement accounts to get by, they're going to treat it as an asset. So, but once you retire or you're close to retirement, you can argue, hey, they're going to need this. They're going to need this very soon. It becomes a negotiation where there's plenty of times where you can get You can talk to them, you can paint the picture, but you have to be using their rules and those arguments in your favor. If you're just trying to get someone, especially if you have bad history, you might be able to get someone to give you something that the IRS shouldn't give, and sometimes that happens. But when it gets reviewed, a lot of this gets reviewed, that's when things blow up, and that's when the IRS can get nastier than ever. So, case in point, we had one person, we got them in a hardship status, and they really didn't deserve it. I'm not sure how we got them in that status. Looking back, again, someone allowed it to happen. 2 years later, they're reviewing it, and the next IRS representative is really upset that we got them into a hardship status, and they really want to go after them even more. So we're really we have to renegotiate it, which we're doing, but it's a harder renegotiation because of what happened previously. The IRS is cracking down on taxpayers more than ever. So this focuses on an offering compromise, but again, as long as your monthly net income is less than the total allowable expenses, you qualify for a hardship status. And I recommend that in almost every case, you go and do the hardship negotiation. The simple reason for that, before submitting an offer, is that the IRS can come after you and hit you with collection actions before the offer is actually received by them. So, for example, if you were to mail out an offer today, September 10th, that's going to take them 30 days to 6 weeks to actually receive the offer, look at it and say, okay, does it have all the pieces? Does it have everything together so that we can actually start working this offer? For those 30 days to 6 weeks, if any kind of bank levies, wage garnishment hits, and then the offer hold hits your case, you can't go to collections because they can't release anything. If there's an offer hold on the case, they can't work it, even though it's a levy or something like that and you have an offer in. So the IRS doesn't have a good fix for this. So what you need to do is go in, either ask for a hold time on the case while you submit an offer, or you put it into a non-collectible status, or even you can ask for an installment agreement to make sure nothing happens while they receive and process your offer. People ask me, well, if you set up an installment agreement, why would you go and would that bother them if that you set up an installment agreement and then submit an offer on compromise? Well, no, actually that's not. You can continue to pay the installment agreement, but they don't look at that as if you're just defaulting on an offer you just set up, even though you are. What's much worse is if you set up an installment agreement, never make the payments, drag it out, and if you do that multiple times, that's really going to create more problems and issues with the IRS. So hopefully this kind of gives you a larger overview. You look at your monthly net income, compare to your expenses. If this was $10,000 and your expenses were $8,400, then you look at the different installment agreement options, which we've talked about at length. And we might summarize those again in future episodes, but we're almost out of time today. What I want to emphasize to finish up is if you have questions, if you have any tax issues, there are options, and it's not as complicated as it might seem. We run through this in about half an hour to 40 minutes. Usually half an hour is more than sufficient. If someone has a complicated case, there's business issues, other issues going on, it might take a little bit longer, but we can have this conversation fairly quickly with someone and get a decent idea of what they qualify for. Yesterday I had someone that was pretty close, and I didn't want to tell them one way or another until I had better numbers. So I said, hey, just shoot me over your pay stubs. I'll look at them and make sure that our numbers are correct. Because it was either an offer or you're going to pay an installment agreement. And I'd rather have better information than not. So again, if you have questions, give us a call, 520-485-7371. It's a free consultation. We don't do high pressure sales. And if you want to bring somebody else in the conversation or talk it over with a wife or family member, we actually recommend that you check us out online. But again, it doesn't hurt to get some good information, to get steered in the right direction, and to avoid bear traps. Avoid sharing information with the IRS that can hurt you. So again, if you have questions, give us a call or look us up online, 520-485-7371. And our email or our website is guardiantaxlaw.com. On there, right at the top, is a YouTube link to all of these shows and more, so you can get educated and learn how to make your taxes easier. So I love that tagline, but really that is our goal, to make this simplified so you can understand it and improve your situation. Have a great day.